Oh, hello everyone. My name is Russell. Sincerest apologies, I was actually just reading the Superman comic right here.
Wait a minute, that's not a comic book, that's a catalog!
God damn it. Superman is a character that needs no introduction. He can fly, he's bulletproof, he can shoot lasers out of his eyes, he's superhuman, and he's one of the most recognizable superheroes in American pop culture. His film ventures, however, that's a different story.
At this point, Superman has been pretty well established as a film icon since the 1978 film starring Christopher Reeve. But after that first movie, it almost seems like there was a fight for control over the property, leading to the disastrous production of Superman 2, 3, and 4, and then after that, it's like they didn't know what to do with the character. There was a moment where they tried to reboot it with Nicolas Cage and Tim Burton at the helm. They tried to make a homage sequel to the Christopher Reeve film with Superman Returns, but that didn't do anything. And then there's that one era where Superman was put in very angsty and dark films, aka the DC Extended Universe, which did not bode well with general audiences as Warner Bros. Attempted to chase the success of Marvel Studios without realizing why they worked. Out of all movies released in that universe, Superman was only ever given one solo film, and that was in 2013.
Flash forward to 2025, and after a boatload of company restructurings and the formation of DC Studios, James Gunn of Guardians of the Galaxy fame will make his own version of Superman, simply titled, well, Superman. Meant to be the star of a newly established shared universe called the DC Universe, or DCU, it's supposed to be very lighthearted and more true to the character that came from the comics. However, it's also clear that Gunn wanted to do something a little different when introducing this version of the character. Did it pay off? Well, I'd say so, and let me tell you why. Now I'm going to mention this. If you haven't watched the movie yet, please go watch it first because I'm going to spoil this film run, so you have been warned. I'm aware I'm probably the least qualified to talk about Superman. I mean, look at me. But think of it like this. You're someone who isn't too well versed into comic book movies beyond whatever Marvel Studios is putting out. Suddenly, you hear that they're making a new Superman film and it catches your interest, especially after a few years of dark DC related content within their film ventures. You already have a vague understanding of who Superman is, so why not check it out? That was kind of my mentality when going into this film. I did watch the first Superman film from 1978 and rewatch Man of Steel for the first time since last watching it in 2013 to compare and contrast how this film would reintroduce Superman to a new audience of moviegoers. So when going into this film, I was a bit surprised when I realized that this film isn't an origin story.
I'm fairly certain that James Gunn mentioned somewhere that this wasn't going to be an origin film, so that's on me for not being in the know. But unlike most introductory Superman films, this is the first one that throws audiences into the action without knowing the origins of the character, aside from a quick sentence at the beginning of the film for those who aren't in the know. Maybe it's because I watched 2 origin Superman films back to back before this, but I thought this was a nice change of pace, especially considering that at this point, everyone knows Superman's origins. Krypton was dying, his parents sent him to Earth as a baby so their species can survive, and he grows up in a farm with the Kents. This film, as I mentioned before, also serves to be more lighthearted compared to the previous iteration that starred Henry Cavill, something that in some way is a contested topic even today due to very passionate fan bases.
Hashtag Henry Cavill Superman!
For those who were not fond of the 2013 film Man of Steel, this can be viewed as a return to form for Superman and in some way DC movies to a certain extent. It may not be as corny and cheesy as the original film starring Christopher Reeve, but this is definitely the kind of film that is needed in this day and age. I could definitely see this film finding its own audience while also bringing back others who were fans of the character from the very beginning. In terms of plot and structure, instead of focusing on the early years of Superman, him discovering his origins, learning to hone in his powers, etc., the story focuses on Superman being put in a corner by all accounts where everyone questions his motives, citizens, news outlets, Lex Luthor, etc., right when he has already established himself as a superhero. In fact, instead of starting on Krypton, the movie starts with Superman completely injured and having to call the dog Crypto to drag him to the Fortress of Solitude. While this might be a deal breaker for some, for others it can give a sense of humanity by starting the story out this way. Afterwards, the story switches back and forth from Superman struggling to save the day when destruction's all over, to Lex Luthor and his overbearing obsession with the alien, doing everything in his power to make sure Superman falls with reputation and power. And with Lex discovering a message sent by Superman's biological parents and revealing to the world another half of it that even Superman doesn't know about, and we'll get into this in a bit, his reputation takes a turn for the worse while still trying to stay optimistic and being that symbol of hope, which is rapidly fading because of Luthor's influence. These two worlds can't be any more different, and yet they intertwine constantly, almost as if it's a battle between bringing light and hope to the world and shrouding it in darkness and fear, especially at a time when the world itself is pretty much shrouding itself in darkness and fear. Such a battle between light and dark being told through these well-known characters would really resonate, making this more of a reflection of modern-day society, something I really appreciate James Gunn doing. In between all of these moments as well are a few side plots that act more like extensions of the two separate worlds. Clark's struggling relationship with Lois Lane, the wholesome bickering between the Justice Gang, Lex's relationship with the President Baravia showcasing their corruption, Eve Tessmacher and her affair with Jimmy Olsen, which ultimately led to Lex Luthor's downfall because she kept taking selfies of incriminating information. All of these seem to connect in one way or another, really doubling down on how much the two worlds of Superman and Lex Luthor intertwine despite being so different in contrast. Especially when it came to moments between Clark and Lois, having these moments in between all the chaos between Superman and Lex Luthor allows for the character to be vulnerable and thus can allow audiences to feel more connected to him.
I want to highlight one aspect of how this movie uses pacing to portray Clark and Lois' relationship, and that's the interview scene that builds up into an argument.
Mind you, there isn't really too much to say on the pacing with this movie. I personally think the movie paced itself well when needed, where things become very fast and hectic during action sequences and slows down during revealing and somber moments, such as the moment Superman fought the kaiju, which is very fast paced. They are contrasted by the sudden reveal of the corrupted other half of the message sent by his parents, which is slow and methodical. But going back to that interview scene, which in tangent reveals that Clark and Lois are dating. This whole scene lasts 12 minutes, and yet its pace, which gradually builds up, makes it feel very tense, showing the buildup of an argument between the two in regards to his actions in Baravia. This will later be contrasted by the more somber moment where Superman tells Lois that he loves her after she tells him that she believes he's good and that he will turn himself in after the corrupted half of the message was revealed. The pacing of these scenes allow for the audiences to get a feel of the complex implications of their relationship, which is the fact that Lois Lane is dating a godlike being. That alone can come with a lot of questions of what can be considered right or wrong, and yet Lois still believes that Clark is pure in heart, which adds to the main theme of the story. Obviously, the most controversial change of the film involves Superman's origins, in particular the reason why his biological parents sent him over to planet Earth when Krypton was dying. Unlike the original Richard Donner film where they sent him to Earth to not only survive but to actually be their protector, or the Zack Snyder film where they sent him to not make the same mistakes they made back on Krypton, in this film they sent him to Earth because they wanted him to rule the world with an iron fist and have an entire harem to create new Kryptonians.
I can see the hentai artwork already.
This was going to be a very weird change, and initially I was a bit confused by the fact that they didn't exactly acknowledge this by the end of the movie. I thought it was strange that the whole world just brushed it off after Lex Luthor was revealed to be a fraud. Like, wouldn't people still be skeptical of Superman despite that? I thought this needed clarification.
But then I began thinking about this, and after talking with others about this scene, I began to understand why it was like that. Now, did anyone else have any problems with this scene? Probably not, but I'm gonna talk about it anyway.
I had to think back to what Jonathan Kent told Clark close to the climactic battle, that it wasn't so much about doing things because a message told you to, but if it's something you want to do. It was Superman's actions that still proved that he is still the kind person that everyone can approach. In fact, after the message revealed, he still tried to save someone from a crumbling building and fought hard to close the pocket dimension portal that Lex opened up to lure him. If that message were true, wouldn't Superman drop the act? No, because he loved life. He wanted to stay by and protect everyone, and he chose to do exactly that rather than upholding a parent's final will. This really did not need any clarification. His actions were already speaking for itself.
This is a good time to talk about the characters in this film, the main players. How do all of them fit in this chaotic new world?
Throughout this entire movie, Superman is put in a difficult situation where he learns that everyone is quick to turn on him once one piece of bad information comes out for him. Despite all this, however, he still stays true to his own morals of protecting all forms of life, even a squirrel, something that audiences will definitely appreciate, especially after the last interpretation of the character was so destructive, and especially considering how unfairly he was put in this position. The fact that he did not know his parents wanted him to rule over Earth after the destruction of Krypton, and knowing that he still wants to stay true to who he grew up being with the Kents, which in turn gives him a newfound appreciation for humanity and life in general. This can lead to a very interesting discussion about how people tend to believe one side of the story without listening to the other side before making a conclusive opinion, and how corrupt individuals, as is the case with Lex Luthor, can sway that narrative for many. David Corn Sweat does a really great job embodying the character of Superman as someone with a passion for being kind and empathetic, someone anyone can look up to and approach without fear, despite the fact that he has powers of a god basically. He really is the embodiment of hope. On the other end of the spectrum, however, Lex Luthor is the embodiment of fear. The whole film revolves around him trying to do everything in his power to ruin Superman because he views him as a threat, not to humanity, but himself. being a corrupt businessman and all that, especially considering he is directly involved in the war between Paravia and Jaipur. He is known to be very manipulative so that things go in his favor. For instance, he uses fear to his advantage to sway public opinion on Superman the moment the engineer finds out the other half of Jor-El's message, almost like a smear campaign. And when he opens an unstable portal to the pocket dimension to lure out Superman, he refuses to close it in an attempt to win against him, showing how light-tempered he can be. He is the very definition of a psychopath. Someone who does not have any empathy for anyone, is very manipulative, and is very obsessive towards the flying red cape just because he doesn't have the same morals. Nicholas Hoult portrays his version of Lex Luthor. While there are a lot of parallels between his interpretation of Luthor and various corrupt CEOs over the years, in many ways, this portrayal is a representation of what could happen if you only let fear and anger run your life. Sure, it's okay to be in fear or to be angry, sometimes even both every now and then, but it would just ruin you if you stay that way for so long, and it would ruin everyone around you, as is the case with the environment he created in Luthor Corp. This is why Luthor is a great contrast to the hopeful and optimistic Superman. Lex Luthor views everyone as pawns in a cruel and scary world. Superman sees the value and good in everyone. One of those people that he views the value and good in is, of course, Lois Lane, someone who tends to be very skeptical and questioning, makes sense, she's a journalist, and yet she still can find purity in Clark's heart. It's no wonder why Clark Kent fell in love with her, as she comes across as strongly independent and yet wants to help him out of the kindness of her heart. Rachel Brosnahan really portrays that strong personality well for Lois, while also serving as a great companion for David Corn Sweat's performance. This movie does have a lot of notable characters, from Jimmy Olsen, Eve Tessmacher, the entire Justice Gang, etc. In some capacity, they all play a big part in pushing the story forward, and they're all fun to watch in their own right. However, a lot of these characters, even Superman to an extent, are all noticeably pretty static, in the sense that they don't seem to have a lot of development as characters. Well, Superman does have a character arc, but it's kind of subtle and not very drastic. This could potentially cause the story to not be considered interesting as a result, since the core of most stories involve change from the status quo, yet it somehow works. The point of the story involves light fighting through the darkness when darkness and negativity has become the norm. Superman, being the champion of that light, would stay true to who he is as a person, and with Jonathan Kent telling him that it's his actions that matter more than the message, he finds a way to keep up his morals while also proving to everyone that kindness and hope will always prevail. He chooses to be kind because he wants to be kind, and not because of a message.
Also, I love Crypto. He may move a little unnatural at times, because he's CGI and he flies, but that doesn't change the fact that I love him.
Movies are meant to be a reflection of our society as it stands, especially now. At a time when everyone is so pessimistic because the media keeps feeding us negative information because drama sells, a time when grifters milk every opportunity to spin a message to be something less truthful, a time when cancel culture will accuse anyone of any wrongdoing without seeing if the other side will respond, a time when war is not only a constant threat, but also something that people deal with on a daily basis, wondering if their next day will be their last. We need something, anything really, to inspire us to hope again. James Gunn's Superman is a reflection of our society. It tells a story of someone struggling to stay true to his moral mission while everyone and everything puts him in a corner, and yet perseveres through all of it. He doesn't try to stoop to the enemy's level, nor does he act like a godlike being. He shows that he's just as human as anyone else despite his origins, and shows that no matter what, he will always try to help and save others. He will always choose to be kind, which is why Superman is the embodiment of hope.
Superman is a reminder that when everything becomes bleak and uncertain, being kind will always be the answer. And from the words of the man himself, maybe that is the new punk rock. With that being said, my name is Russell. Until then, hanggang sa muli.